So, welcome everyone to I Am Not That podcast. I am your co-host, Tezra.
And I am Koa.
And it's I Am Not That podcast.
Liberating the self from the self.
So, we are very, very excited to have our featured guest today, Michelle Brock. I met Michelle a few years back through a friend of ours. And has been very excited, to meet her. And every time we see each other, we always have a good time. She's just, if you want to have a good time, go out with Michelle. She's always down for a good laugh and very free spirited. But Michelle is a past life regressionist. So we want to introduce her and have her talk a little bit about herself. And then we're going to get all into what we think we are, because we're not who we think we are.
Seriously. Yeah, so welcome, Michelle. This is amazing. It's been a long time.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. No, I really appreciate, and like I said, I wish we could talk in person, but this is even better.
Yeah, especially right now.
Right.
Yeah.
So Michelle, why don't you just give us your humble beginnings? You are a past life regressionist, and you really tapped into your spiritual beingness, and everything that comes with that. So why don't you start off by giving us your humble beginnings as a child, and at what point did you know you had some spiritual stuff going on here?
Okay. Yeah. As a child, I grew up in a really, really religious household. And so spirituality was something that was always discussed, but it was, a specific brand or specific rules, or this is what you should believe in. And these experiences are okay. And these other experiences are not okay. So I did kind of grow up with that container. And I had a lot of experiences that kind of challenged what I was being told at home and at church. I was kind of like, oh, but this isn't something I necessarily believe. It's something I experienced myself. So that was kind of how I started on my journey of seeking. It was kind of like, well, what's my truth based on my own experience? And that was kind of what led me to, study past life regression. I'm a student of a man named Dr. Brian Weiss, who wrote a book called Many Lives, Many Masters. And I read that book and I was like, oh, this is the most interesting, most compelling thing I've ever even thought about. And because I didn't grow up with a family that talked about reincarnation or past lives as a, accepted belief from their Christian faith, they kind of didn't allow for that. There was an afterlife. There was, some things that were discussed before you were born and what you're meant to have in life, but having reincarnating into a different body wasn't something that was an accepted belief. So
let me ask you, how old were you when you first started to actually branch out and started seeking on your own? About what age were you?
Well, when I was 18 or 19, I kind of decided to break from that tradition. And, I did it in a rebellious way at first, of course, right? Like, I went to like a lot of Grateful Dead concerts and like, kind of like had that rebellious, like young person kind of experience with it. But after becoming a mother, it really took a more grounded form. And I had a few experiences, through being pregnant and giving birth to my children that felt profoundly spiritual as well. And that was also the time period that I was introduced to Many Lives, Many Masters. So in my late 20s, when I kind of like life got serious and, I got married and had kids, and I'm no longer married, but I'm a mom, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go like do some psychedelics and have a trippy spiritual experience. It was like from a very grounded, mature place that it came from with me. So yeah, like I said, it really didn't formulate until my late 20s, early 30s. And once I started to have these experiences, when I met Dr. Brian Weiss, I didn't necessarily believe in reincarnation because I'd never really thought about it. I think maybe like in Eastern philosophy in college, they were like, oh, the idea of reincarnation, it felt very Buddhist or like having nothing to do with me. It felt kind of like distant, far away. So I never was like, oh, is that a thing? Or can I know who I was in a past life? So when it showed up, it felt very profound because it wasn't something I was expecting or something I grew up believing or something I ever thought would be available to me, that I could actually experience, that I had a different body in a different form than I have now. And all of the profound shifts and changes in my belief about everything that happened after that was so deeply profound. I knew I had to like give that experience to others and share it. So I've been paying it forward pretty much ever since.
Well, I think that's really, really interesting that you thought something that you do now for a profession, that you thought that that was so far removed from you,
Yeah,
but yet somehow it found you.
completely.
So, like, there must have been some link, through your other parallel lives or your other past lives.
I think, looking back on some experiences I had in my childhood, I mean, hindsight always brings clarity, right? Like I look back at some of the things I used to talk about. I used to make up little songs like when I was in the bathtub, and my sister was like, we were talking about some of them. Some of them were about like grandmas that get really, really old and then all of a sudden they're young again. And I would be like, oh, that's weird. Like I was almost like I was maybe like spirit guides were talking to me about stuff like trying to let it get in. My sister was like, yeah, you used to talk about like weird stuff like that. And I always had an imaginary friend. My best friend from childhood I'm still very close with her. She was like, yeah, do you remember Roger? Roger always had to have his own chair. You couldn't sit on Roger. I'd be like, hold on, I'm talking to Roger. Like, leave me, And so I think that, if we're open to, I'm a much more open parent. My children talk about things like this all the time, and I kind of acknowledge it in a different way. But I think in our culture, and particularly when you do have a religious background, sometimes these things get shut down or not acknowledged in a certain way. So I think they were always there, but never nurtured or encouraged, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
So for everyone that's listening or watching, can you just define past life regression? It's like, what does that actually mean? What do you do?
Yeah, so past life regression, the word regression means to explore a memory from a time before. So when you have a past life regression, you're exploring a memory that comes from a past life. And the concept behind it is that we carry all of our experiences from our past lives, from our experiences in the spiritual realm between lives. And some people also believe that because quantum physics is proving that time doesn't actually exist, that maybe we could tap into potential futures, parallel, who knows, right? There's a lot that we don't understand. But the idea is that all of that information exists inside of us, that we actually carry this resonance and these memories from a past life. So what I do is I help guide people to that inner wisdom, to that inner place where they kind of know who they are on a deeper soul level. And the way that I kind of lead them to that eventual conclusion is by showing them memories of when they were in different bodies, in different forms, and look different genders, different ethnicities, right? Like different backgrounds. So that really, what it does is it really just kind of shatters your concept of like who you think you are, right? When you look in the mirror, like, oh, that's me. No, it's not. Right? So it's a really powerful and often life-changing experience. But I hope that answered that question. It's a specific technique that I guide the people to those specific memories where they had a different form in a different body.
No, that definitely answers it. That's awesome. It kind of reminds me of someone, he told me, he described our bodies. He said, well, it's your genetic suit. It's like what you need to use if you want to play in this realm. You need a genetic suit. So
right.
You suit up.
You suit up, and then when you're done, you like, which suit's coming next, right? Which suit will like help me live my purpose in the most profound way, right?
Which suit will suit me? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out that for our listeners, right, some of them may be having the same very experiences that you had, as far as like when you were brought up in the church and taught to believe a certain way and taught that, this had to be a certain way in order for you to attain that, or if you do this, then you're damned to that. And I had that same experience where what I was being taught was conflicting with my inner wisdom, my inner self. And I was like, well, this doesn't quite seem right. But my whole world was surrounded and dictated by these teachings.
Yeah.
So I wanted to encourage people, for viewers who are maybe watching or listening, that it is okay. Nothing is going to happen to you if you go out and seek what your spirit seeks to, that's telling you that there's something more.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to give life and let that voice be more vocal in your life and lead you, because you never know where it could end up.
Most people who are Christians are really surprised when I inform them that actually reincarnation was an original tenet of the Christian faith, mostly because it did originally stem from Judaism, right? And you can't really understand Kabbalah and mystical Judaism without understanding reincarnation. But what ended up happening was, I think it was the year 462. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but when the Roman Empire became the Holy Roman Empire, which was at the advent of the conversion of Emperor Constantine, basically they had, up until then, Christianity had been all these different sects and different offshoots of like mystical traditions, right? That stemmed from the teachings of Jesus. They decided that they needed to codify it. We have to get together. We have to vote and decide what are the rules? Because all of these different sects had different beliefs and different systems. And reincarnation was voted out. Mm-hmm. And the person whose idea it was actually Emperor Constantine's mother. And what she said was, well, if people believe that they have more than one chance, it'll be harder to implement the social control that was necessary under this codified system of Christianity and politics. So when I tell Christians that, they're like, what? I'm like, yes, that's actually as part of a mystical tradition. It's not anti-Christian. It's really not.
You know what, Michelle, you just confirmed something. So I know that to be true, because we listen to Ram Dass a lot.
Yeah.
And Ram Dass said the same exact thing. If people know that, oh, this is not it, I could do, there's another, I'll get another chance and another chance, then then they can't control you in this time. So therefore, since we can't control that, then we have to, boulderize that.
Yeah.
Get that out of there.
And I think that this is kind of what's happening collectively here on planet Earth as we're starting to evolve past these systems, these patriarchal systems, in favor of more personal truth, right? Where the reemergence of meditation as a practice and yoga coming to the Western world, and even Kabbalah being more mainstream. I think that that's kind of what is happening. And you can see that our systems are starting to be a little shaky, because people are like, well, that's not my truth, right? Or the government can't tell me what to do, or I don't believe something just because it was told that I should believe it. And I think that that's a process that's going to continue probably for the next few hundred years. And it'll be exciting to see where we evolve and grow, kind of from that. But I feel what you guys are doing with your podcast, we're all kind of contributing to that kind of collective new understanding of humanity, that we're evolving. That's why we reincarnate, right? What's the whole point of having a past life or a future life if it's not to come here and experience lessons, right? In order to grow and change. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, well, I'm so happy that you talked about that, of how it was indeed a part of, and the groundwork of Christianity, until they found out that we can't control and manipulate people.
Yeah.
I haven't just done just a ton of research and fact checking, but I have heard that there was a lot of editing going on, and what will be the final Bible, and what can be what the people are ready for, and all that kind of nonsense in order to control
and I can't remember what year it was, but when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, but was it in the 80s, I think, where all of a sudden it was all these different books of the Bible that had been left out, that they found these old copies of, including I think the book of Mary Magdalene, and and everybody's like, wait, what is this? That it was actually archaeological evidence that exactly the version of the Bible we use today has been edited, cut, scissored, oh, that's too controversial, or that's going to give people too many freedoms, or that's going to give women too much power. Let's take all that out, right? So I think
make her
that
the downfall, make her she's the downfall of mankind, the one
yes,
who slyly, invited Adam, like all of this stuff seems, I've heard it's been crafted for a lot of different reasons. So.
Yeah, and anti-feminism, I think is a part of our history that is kind of coming out, right? Like the idea of the woman as the witch or the fallen woman, or that kind of thing. And it's thank goodness for men like you that acknowledge women in their feminine power, right? I think that a lot of that has changed. Yeah. So
you guys are the real like beasts of the of the human species, like really just the powerhouse. And it was like, let's subdue that, because we don't need everyone joining that bandwagon.
Because it's terrifying and we can't control it and we can't understand it, and right. And it's this really powerful thing, right? Exactly. Yeah.
And it all boils down to power, right?
Yeah.
It all boils down to power, control, and influence. And I think that's the reason why there is such a distinction. First, let's start with the skin pigmentation, and then, with women, because those are the two realms that threatens the power, influence, and control the most.
Yes.
So because of that, we had to continually make this distinction between the skin pigmentation, or that women are second class or less than to men. So this is the purpose of our podcast, because we want to jolt people, shake people up and wake them up, and make them realize that your skin pigmentation has absolutely nothing to do with the type of quality of life that you want to live, only unless you allow it to, because your skin pigmentation is no different than your heart, right?
Yeah.
It's a part of your body. And so that's why we were excited to have you on, because we are not who we think we are. We think that we are the person who is wearing this skin pigmentation.
Right. Or occupying, like you said, your current suit. One of the things that I learned pretty quickly when I started doing this work was just how universal this humanity is when you look at it through this lens. Like reincarnation is the great equalizer. We have been all things before. We experience things for specific lessons, but we are everything and we are nothing, right? And we're all kind of connected through this, larger journey over many lifetimes. So I did realize pretty quickly that I was onto something that really taught people in a practical firsthand way what equality actually means. Like if people really understood how reincarnation works worldwide, there would be world peace. There would be acceptance, right? So the idea of power and control and, otherness, right? You're this, your skin is that color, my skin is that color, we're different, right? That whole concept is directly challenged by doing this work. And I watched people experience I had this one man one time, this was so funny. He was this like Wall Street guy, he's like one of those like, yeah, I'm a guy. In his past life, he remembered being a woman, and it was like, I think maybe sub-Saharan African, because he was topless in his past life. And he was like, I'm a woman. And he was a woman of color, but he was obsessed with his breasts too. Like he was sitting there, but he had this tangible moment where he experienced being in that body and the feelings of being that, and how much power he had in it. I can't remember like the specific kind of story, but I'm like, I bet you he works in an entirely different way, with like maybe his hiring practices or the way that he regards women of color. Like, I don't know, but because that experience just alone, like, oh, I was that. And the feeling of that, when I was young, I used to walk by a mirror. This sounds like really strange, but I used to like do a double take. I'd be like, what the hell is that? Like, that's me. That's not, that's what I look, I guess like I woke up, I'm like, where did I land this time around? I don't know. So, you know, what I do when I work with clients is I directly challenge the concept of who they were, who they are, and then that larger, like you said, like we're everything and nothing, right? We're a soul on a journey. And sometimes we choose specific forms that have challenges with them, right? In order to kind of learn and grow. I often, when I was a child, would think about like, well, why are some people handicapped, right? Why do babies die and some people live to be 100, or right? It just, that whole concept of like fairness for me is super important. I'm also a Libra and a Libra rising, and I have a big stellium of planets in Libra. So that equality, fairness thing is like stitched into my my being. But I think what's so interesting and unique about the experience of doing a passive regression, it's like a take home, like, oh, that's not me. And you can experience it. It has emotions with it. It has feelings. So, like I said, it's my life's work, obviously, but I love being able to share that practical, tangible experience with people that can kind of take home, like, okay, we're all equal. We've been rich, poor, male, female, black, white, right? Anything in between. And kind of the way that we view each other and respect each other for your specific life path that you chose in this life. You don't get to say, oh, I was a person of color in a past life, so that makes it like I'm like, you know, equal to the experience of choosing that life path in this life, right? That's like a super important part. Like, I'm just kind of like, no, you don't get to do that. Like, do you know what I mean? You get to like have compassion and empathy and understanding for the specific challenges with that. But like, you know, some people, I think that's the mistake some people kind of make. They're like, oh, well, we're everything and nothing. But it's like, no, you chose your life path with your challenges that were unique to you, specifically to allow your soul to kind of grow from it. So we don't get to like equivalate it, if that makes sense, but we get to like honor it. That's my take. That's my approach with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That reminds me of some other lectures by Ram Dass when we talked about people having handicapped circumstances that from the soul's point of view, or from someone who's really trying to just do some work in the physical realm. He said something along the lines of, oh, this time I want to really pour it on. I'm going to be handicapped. I want to be pregnant at 13. I want to die at 17. Like, he's like, I'm going to pour on all the karmic circumstances that I can get into.
And just do some real work, man.
Real work, yeah.
And then he also explained, because I was thinking about that same conversation. And then he also explained how you had mentioned how some babies die and then some people live to be 100. And then he also gave a very good insight, that when a baby comes into form and then they leave, that was their trip.
Yeah.
That they fulfilled that karma for that lifetime. And they're like, okay, now, on to the next or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's definitely.
Yeah, I was gonna say, even being very integrated with each other, sometimes that's your trip. That's what you would call a short trip. But the effect that may have had on someone else, a parent or something, that's their part of their journey. They have to work through that. So that person, I came to help them work out that stuff. Like, it's very integrated.
I absolutely love that you said that, because it is about how we learn and grow together, right? The meaningful relationships that we have, the way that we connect with each other and the way that we impact each other is why we're here. I say this all the time, like, hashtag love is why we're here, like, it sounds like trite almost, but it's really true, right? So sometimes, like, okay, say, and this happened to me and my family. My sister actually lost a teenage son a couple years ago. He was the most evolved of all of us. Like, he was just this bright, and you could almost like not for this world in any way. By exiting when he did, he changed everyone's life. He brought peace to a family that had been fighting. It was just this like beautiful soul contract, but it was incredibly difficult, obviously, but like the growth that we got from that challenge. And like I said, that's the higher viewpoint, right? When you're in the middle of a challenge, you're like, this is going somewhere, right? Like this has, this is making me, better. And sometimes it is through the lessons that we give to each other, right? In a good way and a bad way, right? Those challenging relations with that person that just always makes you so mad, right? Like that's where your growth too, and theirs.
So for people who are interested in like what an experience is by having a past life regression, can you kind of like just walk us through just so that they can kind of get a feel for what they would go through? Because we're also going to get your information at the end so that people, if they want to, schedule with you, have, awesome. Because I actually want to have a past life regression. I want to see, let me ask you this before I go there. I have such a love for dogs and such a love for, animals, period, right? And is it possible to have incarnated as an animal before, or do you mostly stay on this plane as a human being, or can you jump through different forms?
Yes, I have had people experience past lives as animals. And anybody who spent time with animals like knows their consciousness is like the same as ours. They just can't communicate it in the same way, right? Mm-hmm. They all the love and empathy and feeling is there. Most of the people that work with me, though, don't remember past lives as animals unless it's relevant, unless it's something they can reference. For example, I do have a couple of people I've worked with who are shamanic practitioners who have a Native American background. So remembering a past life as a deer is something that they can reference, right? Where another random person would be like, I'm a deer. Like, what's the there's usually a takeaway.
Right, because for listeners, shamanism, they use animals a lot.
Right, the idea of spirit animal or power animal. So if that's an energy someone's familiar with and use. I also have a good friend who had a past life one time where she remembered her cat was her husband, her human husband in a past life. And I remember we laughed and laughed about it because that cat hated her husband in this life. Like he would hiss it. He would be like, take up his space on the bed. He'd hiss at him. He'd look at him like, and she was so deeply connected to this cat. And I think the cat did pass a few years after that, but she was just like, that's why the cat's the love of my life. But in this life, she was meant to explore love connections with other soulmates. So they're like, oh, I'll come and be your cat. So I'll be around you. It's unconditional love. So, I mean, that has come up a couple of times. But like I said, it's usually if someone can specifically reference it. Because the whole point of a past life regression is that there's a takeaway. Like, it's not necessarily just like, oh, it's archaeology and it's like fascinating. It's the past. As a life coach, I try to help people discover past lives that are impacting them right now, today, or informing their journey in some way. So that's why you get to have the memories kind of come, because it's sacred, right? It's like, it comes from spirit. It's not like, oh, you need to know your past life. It's ancient wisdom that I consider very sacred. So it's to be in service of that person, not just because it's cool, right? That it's going to help them in some way or provide some healing or insight or something important that they need to let go of that's holding them back from the future they'd like to have, right? Because it's really this life that matters and the future that we're creating with our choices that matter the most. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah. Can I ask a fun question?
Yeah, I like fun questions.
Do you ever have a session with someone? Did you ever have a TMI session where it's like, oh, you were a porn star in your last life. You were really good at it. It's like you were a porn star the last 5 lives. I don't know what's going on with you. Like, have you ever revealed a lot of information that was like weird or uncomfortable or anything like that?
100%. Well, I mean, I don't view it as uncomfortable because I actually, like shadow work, right? And also too, like prostitution is the oldest profession, right? We've all done it. But you know, I'm serious. It's like, you know, we like looking at it through a compassionate lens where, you know, some people just are more drawn to that, like kind of the darker side or the shadow side of like, yeah, sex and exploitation. And I'll share one of my own past lives. It was a really long time ago, but I remembered being a man who was a totally horrible womanizer. And actually, I was a horrible person. And I actually had specifically a thing for like other men's wives. Like, you know, like I would kind of, and I was just like watching myself doing this from the perspective of me now being like, I am an asshole. Like, what am I doing? Right. But it was for power. It was for, you know, like all of that stuff that we as humans are looking to kind of overcome and explore. I do work with a lot of people. I have had clients who are former sex workers in this life that are looking to kind of explore, you know, that part of what drew them to that. I've had a couple people I've worked with that have, you know, some, like I said, the dark and the light, the shadow, like we all experience all of it. I haven't found any porn stars in the past, but that's you know, like if you're dancing at the court, like, you know, in 2000 BC, does that count? That's like the, you know.
Yeah, but so nothing's really off limits. It's like this is the full spectrum.
You know, it's a deeply personal experience, and you know, it involves a lot of trust in me actually to kind of let people kind of let it all hang out like that. And the way that I navigate that is by being trustworthy. You know, I'm not going to be like, oh, this is who Tezra was in her past life, you know, or like, you know, or it's just because it is so sacred and so personal. But it is sometimes the bad stuff, like, you know, we've all killed somebody in a past life, right? Or we've all done things that we regret. The good news is we've evolved, right? Like we don't judge ourselves for what we did in kindergarten when we're in like grad school, which is really what 2021 feels like to me. It's like grad school. Well, you know, people are like, oh, what if I didn't have a past life before? I'm like, if you're alive in 2020, 2021, and you've never been here on planet Earth before in a human body, you in the wrong place, right? It's like very complex, very deep, like lessons that are complicated. It's not like caveman stuff where you're like, oh, he jumped in my cave. Is he hungry or should I kill him? Right? Like that's a simplified, I just kind of look at it that we've all kind of evolved. But a lot of people are worried. They're like, well, what if I was Hitler in a past life? Well, I haven't found him, but you know, I don't know if he's incarnated or you know what. He's obviously on his journey. He has some evolving to do probably before he gets to the point where he would want to do his own like inner spiritual work, right? A lot of people are worried they're going to be a horrible person in a past life. Well, you were. We all were, right? That's kind of that's my approach to it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Awesome. So I think we want to really make sure that we get into how people can empower themselves and not be stuck, you know, in like we were saying, like in the skin, in the gender, in the particular role or background that they have now. So I'm glad that we're discussing this. I think we want to further get into that. Like,
and I think it's important too to there are many paths to this truth, right? I'm just offering one, and it happens to be one that I found myself. But you know, there are many pathways that all lead to this one kind of universal truth. So,
you know, one thing I was thinking of a moment ago before I forget it. Because I'm sure there are people listening and watching who they just, and it's fine, but they just have a hard time swallowing certain things like, oh, I'm not sure. I mean, I hear you guys all talking about it like it's all true and all good, but I don't know about any of that. I mean, all I know is this life right now, and that's fair enough. But one thing I've noticed, if you really look around at nature, you see reincarnation all over the place, from apple trees to like, to the seasons, to things coming and going and things giving rise to, even on all levels, from something being eaten and dying and then living again through that which ate them. Like it's all over the place, whether it's a star dying and then giving birth to new stars from it. It's like, it seems like it's everywhere. So you can observe it, even if you don't, if it's hard to swallow something like this because it's not tangible. You can't prove it, so to speak, in air quotes, prove it. So it's like you can look around and see these things. I mean, what do you think?
I think that was so beautifully put, that we're a part of nature, right? So why would we have these processes that happen all around us all the time in nature and be separate from them? And this is a big kind of thing of mine, is like looking to the wisdom of the past, right? Indigenous people in every continent lived in a way where they were connected to nature, right? Where they understood that, as above, so below, and the cycles of nature would happen. Indigenous people pan-globally believed in reincarnation, right? We kind of took ourselves out of nature and into our studio apartments and like riding the train. Like we're kind of disconnected from that truth. But I think that that's a really beautiful point. You're kind of like, well, why not reincarnation? Because this is what we can see all the time. Most people, if I start asking them, okay, but have you had an experience about, well, like somebody who died, who came to you in a dream, or did you have a deja vu sensation and you've been somewhere that you felt before? Most people will say yes. Mm-hmm. We just don't talk about it as openly in this culture as I think that we should. And I think that that's changing. I think that's part of it, but I think that's really very beautifully articulated. Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. And and it's funny because even the, what do we call them? When we have moments that we deja vu, mm-hmm. Even deja vu, we just count it off as, oh, deja vu. Like that's just, not knowing that is linked, mm-hmm.
Yeah,
to us in our lives. Like certain things like overlap or, and repeat so closely that I was like, wait a minute, I did this. Like I saw this conversation was happening. Like, mm-hmm. Yeah, can you speak to that?
Well, I think that there's, I think it's an Albert Einstein quote. It's like, there are two ways to live. One is with as if nothing were a miracle, and the other as if everything were a miracle. Kind of like people who like, and I do this. Like if I see 11:11, I'm like, ooh, it's a sign, right? Or like, if I see a feather on the ground, like my kids make fun of me. I'll be like, it's a feather. It's like my spirit guide speaking to me, right? To me, like an experience is like deja vu or meaningful dreams, right? Or, meeting somebody and you felt like you knew them before. Like you can ignore it and be like, it was a brain fart, or like, whatever. Or you can be like, that spirit trying to speak to me. That's my eternal soul telling me that this is just it's the Matrix, right? Not to like talk about that film too much, but the concept I think is very right. Can kind of unplug, and then you're living and you look at things from a different lens and a different viewpoint. So all of a sudden, everything is meaningful, And to me, the first time I had the experience of a past life regression, I saw myself as a different person, a different body, and then all of the implications that came with that. That was my unplugging. Now everything's a miracle. Everything happens for a reason, right? That's kind of my take on it. And that's a personal journey for some people. Some people, it takes tragedy to unplug, right? Or hardship. Some people can get there from meditation, from spiritual practice. Like I said, there are many paths to that truth. Yeah.
So Michelle, tell us some of your practices, because I know that you do past life regression, but you also, you're clairvoyant. You have some other gifts as well, because mm-hmm. like once you tap into one spiritual gift, there's just others just like naturally flow open as well. Right. So can you speak to like some other spiritual gifts that you have tapped into?
I did have a lot of kind of experiences with spirit as a child that I didn't, like I said, I didn't really understand or have anyone to nurture through me. But communicating with people who have passed is something that I was born being able to kind of do. I hear them. I kind of know things about them. I've always kind of just like, sometimes I just know things. I don't know how I do. It's been harder to trust, but one of the things that I've discovered though, when I started to do this work, is that intuitive abilities and psychic gifts, I mean, yeah, some people are born with a little more of it, but you can develop it and practice it. These are human experiences. People that'll feel like I had a knowing, like a gut feeling about something, or they'll like have, I saw that happen in my head before it did, right? So learning to trust that is part of like developing it. It's a little bit more like having like, I don't know, athletic ability or musical talent. Some people are born with more, but it doesn't change the fact that you need to practice it, develop it, hone the skill over time. I'm constantly studying with new teachers, psychics, intuitives, healers. I'm always adding new toolboxes to my box, but you know, it's a matter of like just practicing how to kind of trust. But you know, the hardest one is like just sometimes you just know things and you don't know how you know it, and you're like, you know, raise your hand if you've ever doubted, you're like, wish you trusted your gut and didn't, right? We all can reference that. So, you know, it's just a matter of making it a practice to explore and discover.
So if a person was to schedule a session with you, because I guess now you're doing sessions via Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
Are you doing? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I actually started doing sessions by Zoom in 2015 because people that were not in New York wanted to work with me. So I didn't have to change a lot about what I do with COVID, because it's great. You're going to be relaxed, right? Why relax in my space when you can be relaxed in your space, right? Exactly. And then I guide people through the process, through the experience. It's hypnosis, it's journey work. You know, it's a relaxing experience, right? Your job is to relax and be open to it. But I'm also kind of holding space for people. I'm actively working with your spirit guides and kind of being a little bit of a ambassador to the other side, the realm of spirit, for people on their behalf. So I do sessions by Zoom. It's about 2 hours because we have to spend some time talking first. I ask a lot of people questions about various experiences they had in their life right now. Where do they feel stuck? What are they curious about? What are you wanting to manifest or explore? And then the second half is the actual, you know, memories. And then we talk about it afterwards also too. So people are fully supported through the entire kind of process. So yeah. And it's, like I said, I have the most interesting job on the planet because people are interesting, even their stories about the things that have happened to them in this life, but then you start adding past lives on top of that, and it's just, you know, anything goes. So
that's awesome. So
yeah,
I'm sure we'll probably have some listeners on this who may, because we looked it up, I guess, some of the analytics or something, and sometimes it's people listening in South America and all over the world. It's like, oh, okay.
Amazing.
So listening everywhere.
Yeah.
And for those who don't contact you for, you know, a one-on-one or something like that, what would you say to people who really just feel very entrenched in their circumstances in their life now? Like what kind of, to maybe even open them up even more to who they are, who's running the show?
I think the one thing I would ask people to kind of do is to try to look at your life outside of the blinders of like the right now, you know, and yes, mindfulness practice is important, right? To kind of like be here now, but to kind of like think about the things that have happened to you before in your childhood and know that things are like leading you kind of somewhere, and looking at your entire life as a journey. I think that kind of approach kind of changes the way that you kind of can view things. It's not easy to do though, right? Like if you're going through a really profound challenge, you're kind of just stuck in that moment. But to kind of just know like, okay, after I get past this moment, there's going to be something on the other side, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Sure.
So I've become a Reiki practitioner, and one of the things that we were taught was to ask for the spirit guides on my side and the spirit guides on their side to kind of assist us, right?
Yep.
But every time I ask for my spirit guides to come in and intervene, Michelle, I absolutely feel nothing. So I'm like, I know people who are listening, they probably feel the same way. I'm like, where are my spirit guides? Where are you guys?
So here's the thing, like some people feel them, some people hear them, some people just kind of know, but some people have to just trust that they're there, right? Like it's really different. Like some people expect to have these spiritual experiences that like come and like bang you on the head.
Yep.
And your spirit guide is going to introduce themselves to you and tell you what their name is and tell you why they're here. And, you know, it's often way more subtle than that. It involves trust, right? It involves like allowing the process to unfold. But, you know, anytime you're holding space for another person as a healer, your guides are focused on that, not you. If that makes sense, right?
Yes.
So that's kind of like, because when you're doing Reiki for other people, you're really kind of channeling that energy to be of service to their healing, to their attunement, to them stepping into a higher kind of version of themselves. What I would suggest is maybe in your personal meditation practice to start asking your guides to come to you, maybe in dreams, come to you. And, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the context of your work as a healer, because I think that they're busy doing other stuff, you know. But if you start to ask your guides, like, show me in a dream. I do this sometimes. I'll be like, I have this crazy dilemma. Show me in a dream. Keep a notebook by your bed. That sets an intention to your guides. I'm listening. You have something you want to say? I'll write it down, you know, because a lot of times you'll remember a dream and then it starts to fade pretty quickly after you kind of wake up. So, yeah, that's kind of I'm like, when I do healing work for other people, my guides are kind of like focused on the person, if that makes sense. As long as the person's receiving the Reiki. And like I said, I'm sure you're a brilliant healer. I'm sure people are like, wow, Tezra, that made me feel so good. I feel awesome after. And you're like, but where's my spirit guides, right? they were using it for that other person for that reason. So it's kind of like, it's both. Like you're channeling it as a healer, but like for your own personal life, you can't just like be like, oh, I'm here to heal people. Like you also have things that you need for yourself too, right? Like how can my life work easier? Or how can I have the blessings that I want? What do I need to know or understand about that? So as a healer, I'm constantly balancing kind of both, if that makes sense. Like I'm in service to all of humanity, but I'd like a husband. Do you know what I mean? Like to kind of like support me on my you know, that kind of thing. So that's my advice, to kind of keep those things as two sides of the same coin, if that makes sense. So
yeah, it seems like a theme for what we've been talking about in general, and even the last question is openness, being very open. And there's an aspect of just intention. You know, you set the intention, you're very open, and then you allow it to come to you in the ways that work for you, because like some people literally they can see things right there in front of them. It's not like a mental projection scene. They see it. And some people hear very directly things, and other people are like, I don't hear anything. You know, so it all works different ways.
The most important thing is intent and being open, right? You're like, I would like to know more about my spirit guides. I would like to know more about the realm of spirit. Like, you know, I think that's exactly spot on. That's the entry point. That's the most powerful place you can kind of sit.
Sprinkle a little humility on it, and you should really start to feel some
and some curiosity too, right? They call it, like in yoga, like the beginner's mind. Like no matter how much I know, I'm always reminded of how much I don't know, right? So
that's it. That's for sure. So share with us some of your practices.
So I do daily, I start off with mindfulness practice in the morning. And that's really kind of for myself to kind of like, if I'm upset at one of my friends or like that kind of helps me kind of come back to like now, so that when I do start working with clients, that I can kind of be a clearer channel or a clearer vessel. Like I don't have my own crap in the way. And I've learned over time, like if I can't do that, that I have to cancel that session for today because I can't bring my own kind of stuff into it. And it's really mindfulness. I like yoga also too, but I love like cycling class, like spin class. That's my Zen. You know, there's some it's like really meditative for me too. So like moving my body and laughing with my friends, like Tezra mentioned, that's something that's important to me too. Just kind of balancing being a normal person in a human body with the calling as a healer, I think is just kind of what keeps me grounded and what keeps me able to kind of do what I do in the way that I do it. So, you know, so you can just go meditate all day on a mountaintop, but I'm like, I'm a single mom in Manhattan. Like, I would love to. I mean, I'm all for the retreat occasionally, like whatever too, but I think it's like, you know, important to acknowledge that we're doing these spiritual practices in a modern world and we're living in community and in connection with each other. And I always say this, I'm such a diehard New Yorker. It's more challenging in New York too, because we're like on top of each other, but we know how to come together in crisis. We know how to, you know, I find New York City to be a highly evolved, like community of people. I'll never leave. But it's challenging as well to kind of balance all that.
Awesome.
So.
Well, this has been such a beautiful conversation. It's just what I hoped that it would be, because I think it's very important, because like Koa mentioned earlier about the openness, and you were talking about the openness. And I think that is so important for us, for our transformation.
Yeah.
Especially as we continue to evolve. Because when we begin to open, then we begin to realize, or hopefully we begin to realize, that this is just very superficial. The skin pigmentation really is just a part of my body, just as my lungs are. Like it cannot dictate anything that I do. You know, that comes from my inner self. Right. And so being open, I think that having a past life regression kind of would just like blow that whole paradigm apart.
Yeah.
You know, and make you realize that you are so much more than what society pegs you to be. Because the news, once you listen to the news, it's over. You know what I mean? You have to check out.
Yeah.
You know?
Just all the fear. And I want to also acknowledge too, how powerful the two of you are together, you know, and this is why soulmates, you know, I use like a lot of people are like soulmates, rainbows, unicorns, like, you know, soulmates come back together, reunite in order to support each other in their message and their purpose. And you guys doing this podcast, I think absolutely reflects that. And
so I have to, yeah. All right. So here goes the story.
Okay.
So he and I first started dating, right? And we were downstairs in our girlfriends.
I don't think you were dating yet.
Well, we were like getting to know each other.
I think you talked a few times.
Yeah, you talked a few times. Yep. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. So it was very early on in that whole trajectory. So we were in the wine cellar of one of our girlfriends' restaurant, and little did I know that he had come in before me.
No, wait, can I just say also too, it was a full moon eclipse and we were having a women's meditation and intention setting ceremony. We were writing down intentions. How can we align with our life purpose? And we were like burning papers and we had crystals and sage and like we were having this really like power. It was about 6 of us, I think, like all very powerful women. And we chose that day specifically to kind of be like, what needs to let go, what needs to be brought in so that we can live our life purpose, right? So keep going. That was just that was the context of what day that was.
Wow, I did not remember that part, that it was a full moon eclipse. Wow, Michelle, really?
And we had specifically, our mutual friend had invited us to come and be part of that women's meditation group.
Yeah.
Right.
So before I get there, he waltzes in before, right? And so you all were there, and then everybody was like, oh, wow, okay. So he infiltrated the women's circle, you know, and so when I come in and they tell me that he had
Well, no, he came in, he was looking for you. Then he left.
Mm-hmm.
Then you came in and we're in
Right.
the middle of this meditation and he pops his head in and he's like, has anybody seen Tezra? And we're all like, we're doing something, right? We're kind of like,
We're kind of busy.
And you turn around and you look at him and you're like, hey, right? Yeah. So it was like he popped in, but he wasn't with us. He just kind of like popped in and then we saw like, oh, there's some witchy women stuff going on here. I'm gonna go.
And not to mention he was on the clock. He was working.
Mm-hmm. Across the street. He was working. Yeah. Yep.
So then
he popped in.
Yeah, he popped in. And so Michelle, and then you say, that is you guys are going to be married in a year. Mm-hmm. Like that is your husband. And I'm like, oh, okay, I already know this guy, but okay. And so long story short, it wasn't a year, but we did get married. You did nail it. We did, he was my husband. And like you said, the soulmate thing, Michelle, I never even believed in soulmate thing, right? But I just knew. I was like, that you guys are going to get married. And you were like, okay. Like, yeah. Yep. Because but anybody who is around you guys probably can feel how powerful and peaceful your connection is. It doesn't mean you don't have your moments, I'm sure, right? Every couple does, but it has this higher spiritual kind of vibration to it that I just picked up on right away. Yeah. Wow. And that's so interesting you say that because really quickly, I'm all into the yoga thing, you know? And in our community, yoga, Eastern religion is not popular at all. As a matter of fact, it's like this, so it's like, get away from me, Satan. Yeah. And so as we're talking, I'm like, okay, how do I tell this brother that, I'm into yoga and I'm into the Eastern religion practices and teachings and all this kind of stuff. And so on the phone one day, I told him, I was like, well, yeah, I want to go to the ashram and I want to visit, my spiritual teacher, her teacher, I want to go see, where that was. And he says, I was there. And I'm like, you were where? And he said, I was at the ashram. I saw, the guru. And I'm like, no, Michelle, I'm looking at the phone like you got to be kidding me. Like this, no way. Yep. No way. And then come to find out that our spiritual practices are parallel. Usually soulmates will have like weird things in common about them that they don't realize until they trade stories, like, right? Like almost like you just missed each other a million times before you finally met. And you have a specific message and life purpose that reflects each other. I find that that's true, like, and or work that's complementary. Like you might do what you do and then you do what you do in a different way, but they kind of support and bolster each other. Soulmates reunite to elevate the consciousness of the planet, period. And that's you guys are a prime example. You had the same spiritual and I know like in your community, people are like, past life, what? Like guru, like, right. Yeah, it is. And just the fact that like, okay, is it possible that you guys were looking for each other this whole time, right? Like it's on some like resonating spiritual level, but it took like, the time apart to really learn kind of who you were in this life before you can kind of reunite. But look at this podcast that you guys are doing together and sharing the beauty of your union and the power. Two soulmates don't become doubly powerful together. They become exponentially so. They really do. Because it's like, it's got this like, humanity is going to heal through the example of your love and your respect and your power together. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I'm a huge admirer of, and I'm psyched you guys invited me to be a part of this podcast because it's got a lot of power to it. I just want to say that. But I recognized it immediately. It's like, oh, there's your soulmate. There he is, Yeah, even when I was just like, okay, is that because at that point I was just open to anything, like, yeah, whatever, but not really expecting anything. Yeah. So you nailed it. You were Don't underestimate the power of a full moon eclipse women's meditation circle for manifesting. Definitely.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Michelle, before we get out of here, we just have a couple of more questions for you.
Yeah. Great.
One, what is your favorite cuss word?
Oh, I say shit a lot. Like, oh, I'm like in the shit right now, or like the shit hits the fan, or is it,
Our past guest, that's too.
yeah.
Yeah.
We've had a few F-bombs.
I
Yeah, shit is right there alongside.
I've been known to drop an F-bomb here and there, but I think that, and my kids will probably agree. I'm like always like, everything is shitty. It's just shitty out.
Awesome.
And how can people find you?
So you can find me on my website, which is Michelle with 2 L's - Brock, BROCK. I'm on Instagram. I'm Past Life Michelle. I'm on Facebook, Discover Your Past Lives with Michelle Brock. If you Google Michelle Brock, I come up with, I'm on Twitter. I think I'm Michelle Brock on Twitter. I'm on YouTube. But any way anybody wants to connect with me, I do private sessions, but I also do webinars for people who might not want to do a private session or could afford a private session, who want to have the experience. I'm doing that regularly. I also have an online course. I think it's $23, but it's basically a virtual private session with me that you can actually, it's 6 video modules where I explain the whole process, and then there's a full-length past life regression at the end. So I like to make the experience of this accessible to everyone, everywhere, regardless. So you can find all that on my website and social media. So
Awesome.
Very good.
yeah.
So yeah, we're wrapping up. I just want to just revisit this last point, because even when people are becoming more open, or they've had these little experiences and they've had intuitive experiences, but they get jarred out of that and brought back to reality, air quotes, because of all the injustice and the this and the that, and then the media. It's like it can be hard to combat against your inner, truths and these glimpses that you get, and then being bombarded with, there's a racial this, there's a tension that, there's a racism this. These people are going at each other, So it's like, I just want to just revisit that it's very important to not get just so easily pulled into these external events and stories, as true and as hurtful as a lot of them are, and all that stuff it's not to be downplaying it, or it's not unreal, but you can't be pulled into it so much that you just move away from your inner spirit, your inner power.
I think that it's important to kind of acknowledge that where we're at right now on planet Earth, but particularly in the United States, is that there's a reckoning that's happening. And a lot of this like racial injustice that's being exposed is the shadow work that needs to come out. It's painful. It's incredibly difficult. It's painful for people who are on the receiving end of it. It's painful for other people who like just want to pretend it doesn't exist or talk about it. That's a big thing for me. We got to all be having this conversation. But sometimes when you're in the birth canal to a new world, you can feel like you're dying. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the analogy. We're getting there, and we're doing it together, and it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable as hell. It's really, really, really hard, but it's important to keep kind of focusing on where we're going ahead and how we can, reconcile some things from our past in order to create a new future, which is in essence like kind of like a past life regression kind of thing. I think that's happening collectively, but we have to keep having these conversations, which is why I'm so grateful that you guys invited me to come and have these conversations, because we need to keep talking about it, and we need to pretend it doesn't exist, acknowledge it, but at the same time, not get pulled into the negativity of it, right? To look at it as lessons and areas of growth, and notice that when we need to change, or when we need to stand up for something, right? Like I just think we're in the middle of creating something new here on planet Earth. That can we just get there already, please?
Right.
But one day at a time. So. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been
amazing
and very eye-opening, and it's great. I'm hoping people got a lot from it. to really listen to that inner voice, to really be open and know that you are more than your genetic suit. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
I love you
Yes,
guys. Thank
Michelle.
you. Thank you
you
so
so
much.
much. Yes.
Thank you.